Behind every legend, there's a hidden story. A story of the people who shaped them, protected them, and sometimes were complicit in their downfall. For Elvis Presley, that inner world was an empire built by a brotherhood, a powerful and mysterious group known to the world as the Memphis Mafia. Imagine living your life under a microscope with an inner circle that dictated almost every move. That was Elvis Presley's reality, influenced by the powerful and often conflicting personalities of his Memphis Mafia. These were the men who were more than just friends. They were bodyguards, gophers, confidantes, and ultimately witnesses to the king's rise and his tragic final act. Their impact on his music, his relationships, and his legacy is more profound than you can imagine. Today, we're pulling back the velvet rope to reveal the truth about the Memphis Mafia. Before they were the Mafia, they were just the guys. The roots of Elvis's entourage go back to his high school days in Memphis, a group of lifelong friends and cousins like Red and Sonny West who had his back long before anyone knew his name. They were the boys who stuck with him through the early struggles, driving from gig to gig in a broken-down car. When stardom hit, this core group of loyal companions became something else entirely: employees. They were the buffer between Elvis and the world, a self-selected family handpicked by the king himself. This wasn't a formal organization at first. It was a group of trusted individuals who saw his star rising and recognized the need for a shield against the growing chaos of fame. Their initial roles were simple but vital. They were bodyguards, a security detail protecting Elvis from the frenzied mobs of fans that were a common sight in the 1950s. They were also road managers and personal assistants, making sure everything from travel to accommodations was handled. But their most important role was as confidantes, the only people Elvis felt he could truly trust. For a young man who suddenly found himself the most famous person on the planet, this inner circle was a sanctuary, a place where he could still be Elvis Aaron Presley, not just the king. The famous Taken Care of Business, or TCB, motto and lightning bolt logo weren't just a brand. They were the creed of this tight-knit group. They were a family, and they were ready to take on the world for him. They were the ones who saw him at his most vulnerable and his most joyful, sharing in the victories and witnessing the quiet moments of doubt. They were his brothers in arms. As Elvis's career exploded, so did the lifestyle of his inner circle. They were no longer just a group of friends, they were a royal court. The perks were legendary. Elvis showered them with Cadillacs, jewelry, and cash. He'd often buy a new car for a friend just because they happened to admire it. They lived on his dime at Graceland, a mansion that served as both a home and a private playground where the party never seemed to stop. They would play football on the front lawn, ride golf carts around the property, and engage in impromptu late-night jam sessions. But as the money flowed and the gifts piled up, a darker side of this relationship began to emerge. The same loyalty that made them so invaluable also created a bubble. The Memphis Mafia became a yes-men phenomenon. With a few exceptions, they rarely challenged Elvis. This might have been out of a deep-seated respect, a fear of being cast out of this privileged world, or simply because they were so dependent on his generosity. This insulation from reality meant Elvis was protected from criticism, from bad news, and from anyone who might tell him no. He became disconnected from the real world, and as his career stagnated in the late 60s, particularly during his Hollywood years, this insular existence became a cage. The famous prank wars and the constant demand for Elvis's attention, while seeming harmless on the surface, were part of a larger dynamic where the men's lives revolved entirely around the king's whims. This era was full of legendary stories, like the time Elvis bought the entire group brand new Harley-Davidson motorcycles on a whim, or when they'd rent out an entire movie theater at 3 a.m. just for themselves. These stories paint a picture of unrivaled generosity and brotherhood, but it also laid the groundwork for a more sinister reality. The buffer they provided was so effective, it also made it easier for people to enable his growing dependencies, whether on food or medication, without fear of being challenged. It was a symbiotic relationship. Elvis needed them to feel safe and normal, and they needed him for their lifestyle. It was a cycle that would eventually spiral out of control. The Memphis Mafia weren't just playmates, they were deeply involved in the machinery of the Elvis enterprise. Members like Joe Esposito and Marty Lacker were trusted to handle crucial logistics, from managing tours to handling business decisions. This was both a blessing and a curse.
While Elvis trusted them implicitly, this arrangement often sidelined professional management and made the group complicit in the controversial business dealings of Colonel Tom Parker. Their role was a double-edged sword. While some members like Jerry Schilling were invaluable in helping Elvis navigate his career, including his successful return to live performance in Las Vegas and the pivotal 1968 comeback special, others were accused of a lack of business savvy that contributed to the King's financial woes. They were not accountants or lawyers, yet their input often influenced major decisions. Elvis's endless generosity, his gift economy, fostered a fierce loyalty but also created a strange dynamic of dependency. The Mafia was a group of millionaires who were entirely dependent on another man's fortune. This dynamic would become a major point of contention later on, as some members realized that their security was tied directly to Elvis's well-being and they had little to no financial independence of their own. The tight-knit bond of the Memphis Mafia couldn't withstand the pressure of Elvis's final years. As his health declined and his personal struggles with addiction became more visible, tensions and resentments within the group grew. The once unbreakable family began to fracture. The most famous break came in 1976 when Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, fired 3 key members: Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. The official reason was to cut costs, but many believe it was because they were some of the only people left who could confront Elvis about his destructive behavior and his increasingly heavy drug use. The firing was a public betrayal, and it led to the most explosive event in the group's history, the publication of the tell-all book, Elvis, What Happened. Written by the fired bodyguards, the book exposed Elvis's drug use and private struggles to the world. It was a devastating blow to Elvis, who felt a deep sense of hurt and paranoia. He had considered these men family, and their public revelations felt like a knife in the back. The book was a raw and unfiltered look at the man behind the myth, and its release just a few weeks before his death cemented its legacy, as both a desperate plea for help from men who felt powerless and a final act of betrayal that deeply wounded the king. Decades after his death, the Memphis Mafia remains a complex and controversial subject. Were they loyal friends who protected the king from a world that wanted to tear him apart? Or were they enablers whose presence contributed to his tragic isolation and early demise? The truth, like all things in Elvis's life, is somewhere in the middle. The men who stood by him through everything, the highs and the lows, were a microcosm of his life, full of love, loyalty, excess, and ultimately tragedy. Some members, like Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling, went on to write their own books and became unofficial keepers of his legacy, working to preserve his memory. Others lived the rest of their lives in the shadow of the king, forever defined by their role in his orbit. Their stories remind us that behind every icon, there is a human being surrounded by a complex web of relationships. The story of the Memphis Mafia is the story of Elvis himself. It's a tale of friendship, loyalty, power, and the ultimate price of fame. They may have been the Memphis Mafia, but in the end, they were simply the men who were with Elvis when the music stopped. And for millions of fans, the questions about their true influence and what could have been done differently will forever endure. What do you think? Were the Memphis Mafia loyal friends, or were they enablers who contributed to Elvis's tragic end? The story of the king and his inner circle is one of the most fascinating and complex tales in rock and roll history, and we want to hear your thoughts. Let us know your take in the comment section below. And if you found this deep dive into the Memphis Mafia insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the hidden side of music history. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.